GD 103, Graphical Communication with Duncan Heather. Before we start, I'd like you to ask yourselves, what is the difference between a designer and an artist? The artist has to be able to draw the tree like this, whereas a designer only has to be able to do this. The one big advantage the designer has over the artist is that we can label our drawings. In its simplest terms, your plan drawings only need to be understood by the client. They're not works of art, but just a means of communication. Providing the drawing can be understood, there are no hard and fast rules as to what type of graphical symbols you should use for the layout plans. There's also a lot of rubbish spouted in colleges and universities about graphical style. Some schools even make you draw in every paving stone and brick, which to my mind is a total waste of time. Your plan drawings are nothing more than a discussion document. It's part of your sales package, which allows you to convey your ideas to your client. So they only need to be detailed enough for that third party so that they can understand and envisage your ideas and concepts that you're trying to sell. It's even more important when you understand that most of your clients do not understand the two-dimensional plans. They have great difficulty in interpreting the two-dimensional plan and envisaging what it would look like in real life. So never take for granted that your clients understand what you're trying to explain. I'd almost go so far as to say that the plans are almost unnecessary to sell your ideas. What's more important today is a good three-dimensional perspective of the garden, which then allows the clients to see what they're buying into. What you're trying to do by producing a two-dimensional plan is to reproduce or represent a three-dimensional space on a two-dimensional piece of paper. Using a few tricks of the trade, we can make our gardens appear more three-dimensional. And as designers, we have two main ways of doing this. The first is through line weight, and the second is the use of colour. Line weight. The darker and thicker the line, the more it jumps off the page. So items like the house, trees, walls, outbuildings, etc. should all be drawn in thick black felt tip pen. Because they're taller than the surrounding objects, we therefore want them to stand out from the paper. Items such as ponds, furniture, cars, people, etc. are drawn in a medium thickness pen, and paving, both brick and stone, are drawn in very lightly, so they appear to recede back into the drawing. There's a temptation often to colour the whole plan in, which is unnecessary. By highlighting the areas we feel are important, we can draw attention to these and leave the less important areas out. Colour, or rendering, as we're supposed to call it now we're adults, is covered in another lecture with artist and designer Joe Chance. Tree graphics. Tree graphics can vary hugely depending on the scale of your drawing and the complexity of the graphical style. The simplest tree is a freehand circle drawn with a graphite stick with a cross in the centre to represent the tree trunk. The next is a freehand circle in black felt tip, but slightly less random. The third is a graphite example, where I have drawn a circle using a compass, then overlaid a wiggly line. These first three examples can be used for any size of site and at any scale. All you do is adjust the diameter of the circle to make the trees a realistic size in proportion to the plan. If you have an exact diameter of a tree, say from a site survey you have plotted, then you can set your circle to be completely accurate. If you're indicating new trees to be planted, you must allow at least a 6-metre diameter as a minimum, as almost all trees have at least a 6-metre, if not larger, spread. The fourth group would be used to indicate perhaps cherry trees, or those trees that have a more lollipop appearance. But because of their graphical complexity, they take longer to draw than some other types, and therefore should be only used in plans of 1 to 100 or smaller. Start off with a compass circle, and then add some dots to the edge, closer together on one side than the other. Then infill more dots into the denser side to give your tree a three-dimensional feel. The next two graphical symbols represent conifers. This second symbol is drawn with the assistance of a circular template. By using a pencil, moving in and out from the centre to create a spiky looking graphic. The third is a slightly more abstract style, but useful if you don't want to cover up the detail of the landscape under the tree. The fourth has a more tropical palm tree appearance and may be useful for those students working overseas. And finally, if you have lots of trees together, for example in a wood, you may just wish to draw round the edges and use the dots to indicate the position of the trunks. This style again would be used for smaller scale plans, such as 1 to 100 or smaller. Planting graphics. There are lots of different planting styles, several of which could be simply tree graphics made smaller. But this method is quite time consuming, and bearing in mind the client is only paying for the overall layout plan and not detail, you have to ask yourself, is this a good use of time? Sure, if you want to make a good impression or are preparing work for an exhibition or for your website, then spending extra time on planting graphics may be worthwhile. 9 out of 10 times, I'll use two very simple planting graphic styles. The first I call cloudy planting, the second I call scratchy. And sometimes I'll combine the two. When it comes to hedging, your graphical style will depend on the scale of the drawing and the graphical detail required. The larger the scale, the more detail you'll need. And this loose graphite style, which you can see on the screen now, is probably one of the most appropriate. The second is a more abstract style of hedging and is better suited, I think, for more commercial projects. And finally, the felt tip abstract, which is fine but should only be used on much smaller scale drawings, such as those of 1 to 100 or smaller. Paving Graphics. Remember my adage, life is too short to draw a brick. Yet in books and different schools and colleges around the globe, they still insist students waste valuable time drawing in paving. The only one of these 4 first designs I might consider using is the first, and even then only on exhibition work. The client simply isn't paying me to produce this level of detail at this stage of the design process. Remember, this is a discussion document, nothing more. Paving detail should come with a layout and construction detail, not with the sketch plan. There are only 2 types of paving graphic you'll need. That is the square and the lines. The square will represent concrete and stone paving and will be drawn to an approximate scale of between 1/2 and 1 metre squares, depending on the scale of the drawing, and then labelled with the type and name of the paving. Remember, we're designers, not artists, so we can cheat and label our plans. The lines are drawn close together and represent brick paving or timber decking. Sometimes I'll add dots to the decking to represent lines of nails, but only if I'm using brick on the same plan. Then again, I can label them. Other useful symbols. People are always useful to help give a sense of scale to your drawing, as are cars. Buildings, such as the house and outbuildings, are drawn with a black felt tip pen to make them stand out off the page. Leave a gap for doors and windows, or show the door half open with a quarter circle indicating the swing area. Anything tall like trees, walls, pergolas and arbours are drawn with a black felt tip pen to help them stand out. In this slide, we've also added some shadow to help give the building a sense of 3D, but this is the exception rather than the rule. Other shadow techniques are illustrated on this slide. The shorter the building, the smaller the shadow. Ramps and steps particularly benefit from the use of shadows to help give them a 3-dimensional feel, and also show a sense of which is up and which is down. And finally, you can indicate the depth of swimming pools with shadow. In our next slide, we're representing different water graphics. In the top left, this wavy line represents still water, and in the bottom left, these concentric circles represent moving water. In the third diagram of a pond or lake, it has slightly wavy edges to represent ripples or moving water. Rough grass and cut grass. This is represented by a series of dots on the rough grass side of the lawn. For further information on rough grass, have a look at the Students' Forum. As you can see from the diagram, I have labelled the rough grass and the lawn to make sure it's perfectly clear which side is which. Take a look at Residential Landscape Architecture by Booth and Hiss, or Landscape Graphics by Grant Reed if you want more information on plan graphics. As I said at the beginning of this lecture, there are no hard and fast rules for the graphical style for the presentation of sketch plan. When we get on to the layout drawings for the contractors, there are specific symbols I'll need to teach you. But for now, providing you can make your plans understandable, that's all that's important. Spend a few minutes now looking at some garden plans. Study the graphical style, and you should be able to tell what the materials are without reading the labels.